Hello, hello. Saturday night, April 11th. Time for Stories in the Magic Library. If you're there, check in. Let us know you're here. Hey, Susie, how's it going? Suzanne. Pam, hello, welcome. Sarah. Sue. Hello, Glenda. Missy, good to have you back. Hey, Susan, how's it going? Amanda, glad you're back. I see Rebecca. Hey, Charles. Lisa, glad you're all tuning in. Laura, hope you all had a good day today. Anything exciting to report? Well, I'm going to be dabbing at my face. I decided to shave right before I came down. Of course, I nicked myself. I never nick myself shaving, but got a big nick right here. So if I'm dabbing, that's why. Hey, Donetta and Joanne. Hey, Beth. So everyone grab their bourbon and let's get ready. Let us know what you're drinking. Hey, Patricia. Bonjour or bonsoir. This time of night. I've got Old Forester again. Like I said, Beth and Chris dropped me off some bourbon, me and Ramon some bourbon yesterday, so I broke into the nice bottle of Old Forester, so that's what I'm drinking tonight. So cheers. And I got Our Lady of Perpetual Inebriation right by my side. Hey, Amanda, Cunyala. Some said they changed into their pajamas, from their day pajamas into their night pajamas. That's good. Hey, Laura, Calhoun, Michelle, Terry, good to have you all back. So last night we got to page 48, and we found out what was waiting for me in the dining room that night, where there was lots of bumps and creaks and groans in the middle of the night. And we found out that Ramon likes to hire street people to do yard work around the house. So we had just received a $3,000 bill for 5 days of landscaping from Lewis. Hey, Margie. And that's kind of where we left off. Wasn't such a great cliffhanger like the other two nights, but I think tonight we might finish with a cliffhanger, and we'll probably go a little more than an hour tonight, because one of the chapters is a long chapter. And Rebecca, if you're out there, this is the chapter that you like a lot. So let me see. Yeah, it looks like we got a good number here. So hello, like I said, if you're just checking in, say hi, let people know where you're from. I can see you as you're popping up with your messages, Suzanne. So I just saw you type in your message. I see Frank's. So as you all comment, I get the live feed. So there's our friend Luis Miguel Macias from Mexico. So let us know where you're from. Say hi and let us know what you're drinking. Hey, Lori and Steve and Robin, Pat Jennings, Gina, good to have you back. Cheers. So we're going to start off tonight with the next chapter. It's called Drunk Cooking. And if you didn't catch the memo, I was shaving before I came down. I kind of nicked myself. So if you see me dabbing, that's all it is. Okay. Well, this... No, actually, we're going to start with another Voodoo Day. Then Drunk Cooking, that's the long chapter. Okay? So another Voodoo Day is kind of a short chapter. A lot of these chapters are very short. But last night, we all found out what a Voodoo Day is. I would have these days where a lot of coincidences would converge in one day. Hey, Sean, happy Easter. And so I described a couple of Voodoo Days I'd had when I was young, and I mentioned that when I moved into the Widmer house, a.k.a. La Casa Fabulosa, hey, VG, Andrew, I started having more Voodoo Days, these days where strange things would happen. So we're going to read, starting with page 49, another Voodoo Day. Although we had been in the house for only half a year, it already felt like we had lived there much longer. Within several months, we had developed new routines, and my favorite involved taking the dogs to the park on Saturday mornings. Generally an early riser, I would get up around 8 o'clock and spend a couple of hours doing things around the house until Ramon woke up around 10 o'clock. Then we'd grab the dogs, load them into the car, and head off in search of coffee before ending up in Cherokee Park for a long walk. Most often, we'd go to Days on Bardstown Road. It was a Saturday morning, and I had spent an hour testing a recipe in the kitchen. Outside, the bright sun hinted at a beautiful day ahead. Another hour passed, and I listened for signs of life up on the second floor. Sure enough, someone stirred 10 minutes later, and I started preparing the dogs for the ride to the park. After I buckled on their harnesses, I opened the door and let them run around the backyard in anticipation of the walk to come, knowing they'd be eagerly scratching at the back gate within a quarter of an hour. I returned some items to the refrigerator and listened while Ramon putzed around in the bathroom above. Soft footsteps shuffled along the hall and made their way to the linen closet on the other side of the back stairs, and then a loud scrape echoed as one of the large storage bins built into the original cabinetry was pulled out. I wonder what he's looking for, I thought. Since we kept a lot of summer clothes in that little room, I figured he must be looking for a pair of shorts or something to wear to the park. I closed the door to the refrigerator and washed several dishes in the sink while I waited for him to get dressed and come downstairs. As I rinsed the plates and placed them in the rack to dry, I listened as the huge wooden drawer in the linen closet closed with a dry, raspy scratch. Drying my hands, I went into the butler's pantry. Then, the other storage bin was slowly pulled open, the same annoying grate of wood on wood resonating down the back stairs. I debated whether I should go upstairs and help Ramon look for the desired item, but in the end, I decided instead to wipe down the counters and tidy up the rest of the kitchen. As I passed in front of the window overlooking the backyard, I could see the dogs pacing back and forth in front of the gate separating them from the car that would carry them to the park. I walked back into the butler's pantry and yelled up the stairs, "Ramon, what's taking you so long? The dogs are ready to go." Overhead, I could hear more loud scraping as one of the drawers was opened and closed. It was followed by the same sound as another bin was pulled open and pushed shut. What the heck was he looking for? I decided to go upstairs and see what was causing all the delay, but then the front doorbell rang, and I went and accepted a package from the mailman. When I returned to the kitchen and opened the box, I could still hear the sounds of someone rummaging through the linen closet, but I pushed the noise out of my head and devoted my attention to the package. It was a shipment of spice bush berries from the eastern part of the state, and I needed them for a pork recipe I was developing. I took one of the dried berries and crushed it between my fingers before lifting it to my nose. From the pungent aroma, it was easy to see why many cooks refer to it as wild allspice or poor man's allspice. I inhaled once more, and that's when a door closed loudly somewhere and caused me to jump. Not sure if it came from upstairs or not, I went back into the butler's pantry and listened. Once again, opening and closing noises seemed to echo from the small space of the linen closet. However, this time, they sounded quicker and more intense than before. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer, so I ran up the back stairs to see what Ramon was looking for. Good grief, let's make a little more noise while we're at it. I stormed over to the open door of the linen closet and placed my hands on my hips. What the heck are you looking for? I opened my mouth to issue another reprimand, but I realized I was staring into thin air. The linen closet was completely empty. The only indicator that anyone had been in the small room was that the cabinet doors had been flung wide open, and the two huge drawer-like storage bins had been pulled out as far as they could go, and the two small risers for stepping up to reach the highest shelves had been pulled out below the bins, although we hardly ever used them. I mumbled and cursed as I wrestled the large drawers back into place. Closing the cabinet doors, I went back to the hallway and headed to the second-floor living room. I pushed open the door and expected to find Ramon getting dressed in front of the TV, but nobody was there. Not seeing him in the adjacent room, I flung open the door to the front bedroom and found him asleep in bed, a light snore buzzing around him. He opened an eye when he sensed me standing there. He slowly pulled himself up and fumbled for his cell phone on the nightstand so he could check the time. "Time to go to the park?" he said. He opened an eye. Were you rummaging around in the linen closet just a couple of minutes ago? I said. Me? He looked at me as if I'd gone crazy. I haven't been out of bed since last night. He got up and pulled open the drapes to look out the window to the backyard. "Looks like the dogs are ready to go," he said. "I'll be ready in 5 minutes." He started for the door, but then turned and looked me up and down. "Put on some different clothes," he said. "You look like a hobo again." "Whatever." He disappeared into the hallway and walked into the bathroom, leaving me to scratch my head. I looked across the hall into the linen closet, where the drawers and risers had been pushed back into place. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, but I feared something strange was going on at Whitmer House. Could there really be paranormal activity afoot? No, Steve, he didn't hear any of that. Like I said, he snored like a Bulgarian sailor. Usually, unless it was smells, he usually didn't wake up, and we're going to hear more about that in the next chapter. So, welcome again, everyone. It's Saturday night. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, Sylvia. Hey, Nick. Glenda. Eileen. So, let us know where you're from. Say city, state. If you're out of country, let us know. Let us know what you're drinking. So, I'm doing Old Forester tonight. Cheers. And now we're going to go on to the chapter called Drunk Cooking. So if any of the original gang remembers any of this stuff, make sure you chime in, because usually these stories were told right after they happened, when we would have our weekly dinner club meetings. And this chapter involves some relatives of mine who came to stay with us for a while. So it's called Drunk Cooking. One morning in late May, after a terrible windstorm, we awoke to discover major damage on the roof. The wind had jostled the branches on the nearby maple tree so much that they had broken off and almost toppled the large finial ornament on the northeast corner of the house. The base had been dislodged and had started to crumble as well, leaving hundreds of pounds of broken brick and terracotta precariously teetering at the roof line. That's when we decided to step up the plans for the restoration of the facade. If we had to fix the damage from the storm anyway, we might as well go ahead and do the entire facade. The problem was we knew very little about the restoration of old facades, much less the intricacies of general masonry that would be required to complete such a project. Not only was there tuck pointing to be done, bricks had to be relaid, and a number of decorative features needed to be rebuilt before the facade could be repainted. As soon as we found out, it was hard to find anyone to give an estimate for the repairs or the restoration work. The two men who did show up stood in the front yard, looked up at the roofline to survey the damage, and then they shook their heads and walked off. Several others offered to give us estimates for the restoration of the facade, but nobody wanted to take on the task of rebuilding the finial and its broken 3-foot base. When most heard the damage centered on an ornate piece of decoration on a steeply pitched roof above the 3rd floor, they immediately declined the challenge. My cousins, Pat and Mark, on the other hand, were not daunted by the job. So during the first summer in Whitmer House, Pat and Mark were out of work and in need of a place to stay. What was I to do? Tell them they couldn't stay with us? They'd been house guests before, and although tensions had started to rise toward the end, it usually worked itself out. We had 6 bedrooms, after all, so Ramon and I made a deal with them. In exchange for their services as handymen around the house, they could do practically anything. We would provide them with food and lodging and the occasional bit of spending money. In many respects, it started off as an ideal arrangement. Pat and Mark were both expert tile layers, so we soon had beautiful floors laid down in the kitchen and butler pantries. They both had worked as professional painters before, so that came in handy as well. When they surveyed the damage from the windstorm, they were relatively confident they could rebuild the brick pedestal and remount the finial with the proper scaffolding and supplies. Restoring and painting the facade wouldn't require too much effort either, they said. Ramon and I put on work gloves, and we got ready to help. Within a couple of days, a cherry picker had been rented, and Pat and Mark began rebuilding the broken piece at the roof line. Scaffolding went up across the front of the house, and for a week we scraped off all the old gray paint. After that, we spent another 2 weeks scratching out the old mortar from between the bricks and tuck pointing the entire facade. Then we had to rebuild and recreate various pieces that had broken off. During that time, if there were oddities, weird occurrences such as invisible footsteps and things moving around on their own, they went unnoticed, no doubt because of all the noise and activity in the house. A month and a half later, we were ready to start painting. But when the day came to start, my cousins were nowhere in sight. To mark the end of the tuck-pointing phase of restoration, I'd given them each a chunk of money, and they headed out the back door, saying they were going to the bar around the corner for a beer. 10 days later, they called collect from the Black Hills of South Dakota, where their truck had broken down, wanting us to wire them in advance on their next allowance so they could get the truck fixed and have gas money to return to Kentucky. As tempting as it was to leave them stranded in the Mount Rushmore state, we sent the money, and 3 days later, Pat and Mark were back in Louisville. A couple of days after their arrival, the painting of Widmer House began. We had rented a cherry picker again to get to the tricky spots that were out of reach of the scaffolding, and the first week was spent applying a Pepto-Bismol colored coat of primer. This caused more than a few eyebrows to raise in the neighborhood because many feared we were planning on painting the house pink. But when we started applying the real colors, people stopped worrying. From the minute the first bit of paint went on the front of the house, it was obvious that the results would be magnificent. Soaring some 40 feet above street level, my cousins started with the decorative peak of the gable and worked their way down, applying splashes of honey yellow and voodoo green to the stone trimming and railings, and rosy brick red to the exterior walls. Burgundy and hunter green rounded out the trim over and under the windows. The numerous acanthus leaves and garlands would be finished in gold leaf or metallic gold paint. As more color was added to the front of Widmer House, word traveled through the neighborhood, and most days there were small crowds of onlookers on the sidewalks out front. By the time the restoration and painting of the facade were completed at the end of the summer, the house at 1228 South 3rd Street had become something of a local conversation piece, and cars were regularly pulling up to the curb so people could snap pictures. Some finishing touches remained, and the front yard still needed more work, but all in all, the exterior had come a long way in the short time we had been there. With the cooler weather around the corner, it would be the perfect time to return my attention to the inside of the house. Pat and Mark, however, had other plans. Several months of regular work had increased their appetite for wanderlust, and the open road was calling. Despite all the great work they had done around the house, they were starting to wear out their welcome. Although Ramon and I had established some basic ground rules as to what constituted an acceptable curfew for house guests, Pat and Mark never felt the need to abide by these rules. My cousins tended to be night owls, which wasn't a bad thing in and of itself. However, they were not capable of silent late-night comings and goings. Rarely a night passed without them waking up the rest of the household when they came back from their carousing, which was often around 4 when the bars closed in Louisville. Hey, Aunt Jane. Early one morning, I awoke to find Ramon standing at the foot of the bed, baseball bat in hand. What? I pushed myself up on my elbows and squinted against the light he had switched on. I heard something downstairs. He moved to the doorway and peered out into the dark hallway. I didn't hear anything, and I'm the light sleeper. I listened, but other than the sound of dogs wrestling on the bed, there was nothing. It sounded like breaking glass. Ramon edged out of the hallway and stopped to listen. I collapsed back into a prone position. Good luck finding out what it is. I've been there, done that before. I'm staying in bed. I think someone broke a window. Ramon entered the stairwell and disappeared into the darkness without saying another word. And don't mess up my dining room table, I called out after him. Bess grumbled in her sleep as if to second the motion. After several minutes of hearing Ramon go from room to room in search of the mysterious noise, guilt got the better of me. I crawled out of bed, grabbed a Louisville Slugger, and joined him on the landing of the stairs. We crept down and cautiously checked all the panes in the windows on the first floor, but none of them had been broken. I looked under the dining room table, and Ramon stuck his head out the back door. We found nothing. I know I heard something break down here. Ramon strode purposefully toward the little door under the back stairs that led to the basement. And I know it was a window somewhere. He flipped on the light and descended the steps to the dank rooms under the house. I joined him in a large room reused for storage. The ceiling bulb had burned out in the adjacent room where shadows seemed to creep across the floor and up the old cold stone walls, but other than that, everything seemed to be in order. After checking the laundry room, we walked into the next area and examined the 2 small windows high up in the wall that normally let in a bit of light from the ground level outside, but they were both fine. Dirty, but fine. There was only one room left to search, the small room on the other side of the laundry that we used to store things like lawn furniture and pool supplies during the colder months. It was also the only room in the basement that had a door that led outside. You could open the door, walk up half a flight of stairs, and you'd be in the backyard. Given its location at the back of the house and the heavy door that sealed it off, I doubted that Ramon could have heard anything breaking in that room. But Ramon pushed open the door with a loud scrape and flipped on the light switch. There stood Mark in the middle of the room, illuminated by the stark light of a lone bulb. A nearby window was noticeably devoid of a large chunk of glass, much of which lay in glittering piles on the cement floor. A slightly crazed look had painted itself on Mark's face, and his eyes darted back and forth. From one of his hands, a dart cut generously dripped blood to the floor. "How did you break the window?" Ramon surveyed the scene and then walked over to the gaping hole in the pane. "I don't know." Mark had suddenly become sheepish. "What do you mean, you don't know?" I grabbed a broom and I started to sweep up shards of glass. "What are you doing down here anyway?" I said. "I don't know." He lifted his good hand and scratched his chin. "Are you insane?" I jabbed the broom at the floor and tried to round up all the stray bits of window. "Just what we need, one more thing to fix." I bent down and swept the debris into a plastic dustpan. "Hey, Veronica." "Well, I didn't want to wake you up, so I came in through the basement." "Oh, well," I said, "you did a bang-up job of not waking us up." Looking at Mark, I came to the realization that he wasn't processing my sarcasm as readily as he usually did. My cousin lifted his head and gave a paranoid sweep of the room with his eyes. "What'd you do, break the window to get in?" said Ramon. "We've told you 1,000 times to ring the doorbell." "I was trying to get out," he said. "Get out?" Ramon and I both spoke in unison. "Didn't know where I was and thought I was trapped in here." Mark lifted up his hand and studied the gaping wound. "You've got to be kidding, right? You didn't know where you were." I looked at my cousin, and he just shrugged his shoulders. "Okay, so let me get this straight. You broke into the basement." "I didn't break into the basement. I left the cellar door unlocked before we went out tonight." "Whatever," I said. "So you entered the basement here, and then all of a sudden you forgot where you were." I looked at Ramon, who had started to leave, but he decided to stay when he heard the conversation getting interesting. "Well, I couldn't help it. When I turned the lights out, I didn't know where I was," Mark said. "It was dark." "Of course it was dark, numbskull," I said. "That's the way it gets in the middle of the night." I shook my head. "Maybe you need to return during daylight hours next time so you don't get lost and forget where you are." "Well, maybe," he said. I couldn't help it. "You just forgot where you were all of a sudden." With a flip of the switch, I plunged the dank cellar room into darkness, and I cried out in an exaggeratedly shrill voice, oh my goodness, where am I, where am I?" I shuffled around like a ninny, and I bumped into the hot water heater for added effect before turning the lights back on. "Oh, pardon me," I said. "The lights went out, and for a minute I totally forgot where I was." Mark stood there sullen. Ramon moved into my line of vision, and I saw him lift a finger to his nose and replicate a snorting gesture as a possible explanation for my cousin's altered state of awareness. Good grief, I thought, just what we needed. "Come upstairs so we can bandage your hand," I said. "You need to stop bleeding, or you will attract zombies." And then there's a little chapter break right there, which is a good time to take another sip. So cheers, everyone. And then after the break, we return. So after that, Mark swore that he and Pat would be in well before the bars closed, and if the doors were locked, they would ring the doorbell and not try to gain entry into the house through unconventional methods. That arrangement worked out well for less than a week. After that, Mark swore that he and Pat would be in well before the bars closed. So I want to reiterate that. So one night, a strange metallic clanging and rattling woke me from a deep sleep around 3:30. Ghosts? Images of spectral Victorian chain rattlers danced in my head. Just as I was about to stop straining my ears and fall back to sleep, another ringing clatter echoed from the front of the house. I pushed myself up on my elbows and cursed. Suddenly, the floor above shook with a hard thud, and I was immediately out of bed, grasping the baseball bat. I slid open the pocket door to the little room next door and listened in the darkness. Overhead, another thump made the floorboards groan. Then something banged against the wall and tumbled down a flight of stairs before crashing onto the landing below. Hey, Lisa Cooper, butler. What the heck was that? Ramon had stuck his head through a door and spied me in the solitary shaft of moonlight as I slowly pulled open a door to the hallway. Wait a minute, he whispered. Who knows what it could be? He was cut short as something heavy scraped on the hardwood floor and thumped against a wall. After some scuffling on the stairs to the bottom floor, another loud crash reverberated through the house. Ramon in tow, I exited through to the hallway and turned on the light in the stairwell. Bats raised in the striking position, we quickly snuck to the landing and peered down to the final set of steps to the foyer. I flipped on another light, and there lay Pat, sprawled on his back in the middle of the floor. Upon realizing he was the object of speculation from our perch up on the landing, he slowly pulled himself up to a semi-sitting position. "What's up?" he said, rubbing his hands together. Several pictures had been knocked from the walls in the stairwell, and I stooped to pick them up and return them to their spots. One of them had a crack in the glass and would need to be reframed. I slowly exhaled and took a deep breath. Pat, I realized, had climbed the scaffolding outside all the way to the third floor and forced open one of the windows in my office rather than come through the front door. Then he had stumbled and tripped most of the way down the stairs to the bottom floor. Ramon shook his head and went back to bed. "Your cousins," he muttered. "Sorry, man. I was going to get something to eat before I went to bed." Pat rose and massaged a spot on his back. "I tried not to wake you guys up." He rubbed his hands on the front of his pants and looked around. "Well, here we are awake. If you had rung the doorbell, at least only one of us would have needed to get up." Pat turned and staggered off toward the kitchen, leaving me in a wake of alcohol vapors. "I need to eat something. Sorry, man. I'm just trying to survive." "Oh, so you're trying to survive by climbing 3 stories of scaffolding while inebriated," I called after him. "Sorry, man. I'll knock next time." He slurred the words over his shoulder and disappeared. "And eat one of the sandwiches I already made for you guys in the refrigerator," I yelled. "No more late-night cooking for you jokers," I said. "You pass out and leave everything burning on the stove and it wakes Ramon up. He's going to snap and kill you both one of these days." Upstairs, I crawled under the covers and soon fell back to sleep. So there's another break in the same chapter. So, I need a sip of water. Everyone grab their bourbon. Yeah, Joanne Klein, he should have gone to Burger Boy. Yeah. So, if you're just checking in, say hi, let us know where you're from, and tell everyone what you're drinking tonight. All right, so we're going to pick up after the break. So a week later, Ramon and I had gone to dinner at 610 Magnolia, an old Louisville favorite around the corner, and when we retired about midnight, we were relatively confident of a good night's slumber. Pat and Mark were ensconced in the back bedroom, sound asleep for all intents and purposes, so we assumed they were in for the night. But several hours later, my eyes flew open when I felt the dog stirring on the bed. After squinting in the darkness, I realized they'd gotten up because somebody was standing near the fireplace mantel. It was Ramon, who walked over to a window and slid up the sash. "Someone's cooking downstairs." As soon as he pointed it out, I became aware of a spicy aroma permeating the house. "I can't believe your sense of smell," I said, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "You sleep through everything, but food will wake you up in 2 seconds flat." "I'm going to kill your cousins." He walked into the next room to open some windows and let fresh summer air into the room. That's when the smell of something scorched hit my nose. I raced downstairs, the dogs gambling along behind me. Evidently, they thought it was morning and time to go outside, and I opened the back door and let them out. On the stove, a large saucepan with messy ribbons of red dripping down its sides, sizzled over a low flame, the remainder of the contents slowly burning to the bottom. I turned off the stove and walked into the next room where Pat slouched on the couch in front of the little TV. In his lap was perched a humongous bowl of steaming chili. "What the heck is the matter with you? You're a first-rate knucklehead, you know that?" I said. Pat opened his eyes and looked around, probably only just coming to the realization of his surroundings. "What? Where am I?" He straightened up from his hunching position, and the large bowl tottered precariously between his knees. "Seriously?" I put my hands on my hips and stared at him. "You two dingbats seem to be forgetting where you are an awful lot lately." I walked to the doorway in the kitchen and pointed at the charred mess on the stovetop. "Remember where you are now, Julia child?" Something registered in his eyes, and a hangdog expression settled in over his features. He looked down at the bowl of chili and frowned. "I wasn't cooking," he stammered. "I was just heating up the chili you made for me." "Same thing." I opened a window and turned on a desktop fan. "See this?" I said, yanking open a door to the refrigerator. Inside were containers of homemade ham salad and pimento cheese and half an apple pie I'd baked the previous day. There was also a big plate of bratwurst, a bowl of peeled hard-boiled eggs, and 3 leftover ribeye steaks that we had grilled for dinner the night before. A large pepperoni pizza with 1 slice missing rested on the top shelf. I'd also baked buttermilk biscuits, peanut butter cookies, and 2 loaves of whole wheat bread that morning. It was all out on the counter in plain view. Paul sank back against the cushions. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll eat my chili and go to bed." All of a sudden, I think I'm like skipping a chapter. Oh, yeah, I skipped a little section. So let's just go back because there was a precursor to this scene. I knew I was skipping something. So where we left off before, Paul tumbled down to the bottom of the stairs, and he said he was going to go back to sleep. And I crawled back under the covers, went back to sleep, and there's just a couple paragraphs that I skipped over. So later that morning, the tantalizing aroma of fried eggs and bacon tickled my nose and roused me from my sleep. Then the smell of buttered toast made my mouth water. I turned over in bed and smiled to think that someone was making breakfast for me. When I opened my eyes, I saw that it was still pitch black outside. I looked at the clock on the bedside table and discovered that not even half an hour had passed since leaving Pat downstairs. Quietly, I bolted for the back stairs, praying that I could make it to the kitchen and work some magic with a fan and a can of air freshener before Ramon came in. I was getting ready to creep down the hallway. Ramon's calm voice cut through the darkness. "I'm going to kill your cousins, both of them, any day now." I ran down to the kitchen where Pat sat at the table preparing to tuck into 4 eggs sunny side up and what looked like a whole pound of bacon. Nearby stood a plate stacked high with buttered slices of toast. I resisted the urge to clobber him while I turned on the exhaust above the stove. "What did I tell you? Eat the stuff that requires no cooking," I said. I yanked open a window and then theatrically opened the door to the refrigerator to reveal a glut of ready-to-eat contents. "Look, food for days, and none of it has to be cooked." I pointed out an entire cold pizza and a basket with 3 different kinds of wax paper wrap sandwiches inside. There was a plate of cold fried chicken. Then I threw Tupperware containers full of potato salad, macaroni salad, and marinated vegetables onto the table in front of him. I also hauled out a huge chocolate cake and a dozen blueberry muffins I'd made earlier that day. "Why do you feel the need to cook so late at night, especially when you know it smells up the whole damn house and when there's a ton of stuff ready to eat?" "Sorry, man. I'm just trying to survive." Pat speared several pieces of bacon with his fork and made himself a folded-over sandwich with a piece of toast. "Had a craving for bacon and eggs, man." I reached for a can of Lysol and liberally sprayed the kitchen. "No more cooking at night. Eat the stuff I made for you, please." I looked back and saw Pat's eyelids drooping as he polished off the rest of his early morning breakfast. Okay, so that was the part I skipped. And then, a week later, I woke up. I go down there and find out he passed out as he was heating up chili. So he technically wasn't cooking, he was only heating things up. So, of course, he didn't know where he was. And the same thing happened. I went to the refrigerator and I said, "Okay, look at all the stuff." I always had tons of food there for them. But he always liked to cook. So After I pointed all the food to him, this is where we'll pick up. Pat sat back against the cushions. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll eat my chili and go to bed." "Well, get up then and eat it over there." I pointed at the kitchen table. "I don't trust you to eat it here. You'll pass out and drop this bowl of chili. I know you." At that moment, there came a scratching at the back door, and I went to let the dogs in. "Man, I'm fine," Pat said, settling back as if he'd already won the argument. "Chill out." "Whatever. You two are wearing out your welcome pretty fast," I said under my breath. As I went past the stove to the door, I put the scorched saucepan in the sink to soak. Rocky and Bess ran in as soon as I opened the door, but Fritz was nowhere to be seen. While peering out over the backyard and into the alley, I spied him standing stock still against the back fence. When he didn't respond to my calls, I went out to see what was keeping him. As I approached, a low growl rumbled in his throat, and I noticed that he had his nose up against the slats as if he were trying to get a whiff of something on the other side. I reached down and picked him off the ground, and when I stood up, a motion near the dumpster caught my eye. It appeared to be someone leaning over the edge and rooting around inside, and when the form righted itself, I saw that it was a woman with billowy skirts and a bandana or turban on her head. The light on the back alley had burnt out, so I couldn't really tell for sure, but it looked like Josephine. Before I could study the figure, the woman deposited something in an old grocery cart and started pushing it down the alley to Oak Street. The wheels bumped and rattled over the uneven bricks as her dark form faded from sight. A light breeze rustled the branches of a nearby tree, and although Josephine was lost from view, it seemed that a soft melody trailed behind her, borne aloft every now and then by the wind. I couldn't make out any of the words, but the lines she sang sounded French to me. I carried Fritz back to the house and locked the door behind us. Chin drooping, Pat was still sitting on the sofa, and Rocky and Bess were sitting on the floor, looking up at him with a bewildered expression. "You better not be falling asleep," I said. "No, man, I'm not falling asleep." He shifted languidly in his seat. "Gonna eat my chili and go to bed." The bowl that rested precariously on his knees, however, showed no signs of any chili having been eaten. "Ramon is really going to lose it one of these days, and he's going to kill you." I started back up the stairs, but then I turned around, and I found myself standing over my cousin again. "You promise me you're not going to pass out?" "Yeah, man, I promise. I'll be done and up in bed in 5 minutes." I narrowed my eyes and retreated. Behind me, the dog's toenails clicked on the wooden stairs as they followed. It was after 4 in the morning, and I was exhausted. Ramon thankfully had gone back to sleep right away, and as I entered the hallway on the second floor, I could hear him snoring loudly. Looking forward to at least 3 hours of sleep before I had to get out of bed again, I put the dogs up on the bed and crawled under the covers. The first 5 minutes I lay there, my muscles tense for the inevitable disaster, but when nothing happened, I finally started to relax. After 10 minutes more, I was breathing a bit easier and hoping for the best. I closed my eyes. 10 minutes later, all was silent. So I convinced myself that Pat, out of courtesy, had very quietly mounted the back stairs and disappeared into his shared room at the back of the house. I sighed deeply and let myself drift off. Not too long thereafter, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. The dogs jumped up at the foot of the bed. Cursing, I slowly pulled the covers back and put my feet on the ground. In the hallway, I stopped for a moment and listened. Ramon, by some miracle, still snored away, and I was grateful for that. I stole down the front stairs to see what had happened. On tiptoes, I crossed the dining room and pushed the swinging door open into the butler's pantry. Before me was a sight almost too terrible to bear. Surveying the disaster around me, it was easy to see what had happened. When he passed out, Pat's legs had relaxed and come apart, and the uneaten chili had plummeted to the tile floor, and the antique bowl had volcanoed its contents up and around the entire room before shattering into dozens of small pieces. I put a hand to my mouth and gasped as the magnitude of the destruction done by a single bowl of chili became evident. From the ceiling, which had been covered in gold anaglypta and hundreds of hand-applied gemstones, globs of ground beef and tomato sauce rained down around me. Practically every inch of the apple green walls and hand-stenciled fleur-de-lis in the tiny room was covered in chili spatter, as were the cream-colored wainscoting and the wooden trim. On the nearest jacquard curtain, 3 kidney beans slid down the fabric in gloppy rivulets. 2 months' worth of tedious work was now drenched in a chaos of beans and chili sauce. And it even splattered into the kitchen, covering a swath of green and blue tiles in a streak of messy red. Yeah, Eileen said, they got to go. That's what everyone was saying, yeah. Pat, on the other hand, hadn't been touched by the mess, save for a solitary smear of chili in the middle of his forehead. You said you weren't going to pass out. I shouted it so loudly a blood vessel popped somewhere in my left temple. But from Pat there was no response, save for a long, drawn-out snort as one of his arms fell from his lap and landed on a chili-splattered cushion. Just then, the door from the dining room swung open. Ramon entered from the butler's pantry, but when he saw the disaster area, he immediately spun around and exited the room, all in the same motion. Good luck cleaning up that mess, he called out over his shoulder. And when your cousin wakes up, tell him I'm going to kill him. I lowered my face so Pat could better hear me. Wake up, I said. But Pat had entered an even deeper sleep and began to snore loudly. Careful to avoid the puddle of chili in the middle of the floor, I ran into the kitchen and grabbed 2 banged-up soup pots. I crashed them together right in front of his face. Wake up! But Pat continued his loud snores. I realized then my stocking feet were covered in chili, and I had by some miracle avoided cutting myself on all the random bits of ceramic scattered throughout the 2 rooms. I carefully hopped over to the coat room, removed my socks, and grabbed a pair of hard-soled slippers. I returned with a long-handled old-fashioned mop and poked Pat in the leg with it. Finally, he opened an eye. What? I put the head of the mop on the floor and tried to clean a path through the chili. I knew you were going to pass out. Look at what you did. Pat's head and body remained perfectly still as he rotated his eyes in their sockets and scanned the environs. What happened? He pushed himself up and took another look around the room. You did exactly what I said you were going to do. You passed out and you dropped your Jethro Bodine-sized bowl of chili on the new tile floor. I made a dramatic outward sweeping gesture with my arms and faked a big smile. Then I pointed at the floor, the walls, the ceilings, the curtains. Oh, man. Pat tried to stand up but fell, mashing chunks of tomatoes and chili beans into the fabric of the couch. Get up and start cleaning, I said. But man, he stood up for a moment and then slipped and fell, more beans and tomatoes smashing into the tile. I pointed the handle of the mop at him so he could grab it and pull himself up to a vertical position. Man, after taking several steps, he slipped on a large, succulent chunk of ground beef and crashed to the floor in the kitchen. He managed to pull himself up right away, but he slipped again and stumbled back into a clean section of kitchen wall. The chili riding on the back of his flannel shirt smeared itself along the new paint job, the bright red of the tomato sauce contrasting nicely with the sunny shades of yellow. On second thought, maybe we should go to bed, I said. I'll do the cleaning. Pat trudged upstairs and slowly made his way to bed. 2 hours later, after I had cleaned up the last of the con carne, I would find one long chili smear on the wall in the stairwell as I went back up to bed. Before crawling under the covers, I went to the front room on the 2nd floor and opened the shutters on the windows looking out onto 3rd Street. I don't know why I felt the need to do this, but when I did, I stopped for a moment and gazed out onto the street below. There, under the cone of weak light coming down from one of the street lamps, stood a lone figure. He appeared to be standing there, looking up at the house. The lights weren't on in the room I was in, so I'm not sure if he could see my silhouette or not, but after a moment or two, he seemed to shake his head and shuffled down the sidewalk. So it was Friday night, and Ramon had spent the entire day waxing the hardwood floor downstairs in preparation for a visit from his mother in Texas. I had had a full day of teaching, so we were both beat when we turned in for the night. Pat, somewhat subdued by the chili affair, had decided to spend a couple of nights at a friend's house. Mark, on the other hand, had found cause for celebration and was out at one of the neighborhood bars with some friends. To prevent him from breaking into the house and smashing out all the windows, I had reluctantly told him I would leave the back door unlocked. I slept fitfully until about 2 in the morning when I heard Mark come in the back door and stumble up the stairs. My fingers crossed that Ramon would not wake up. I listened as my cousin softly shuffled down the hall and disappeared into the back bedroom. After 5 minutes, I breathed a cautious sigh of relief and let myself fall back to sleep. Sometime later, maybe a half hour or so, I came to the realization that Ramon was awake and standing in the doorway. "I heard water someplace," he said, head turning slightly to better make out a sound I could not hear. "There's a dripping noise coming from downstairs somewhere. I don't know. I think we have a leak." I got up and sat back on my elbows. "Is it raining?" I listened intently, but heard nothing that sounded like water. In the back hallway, however, I thought I could hear a slight shuffle as someone retreated to the room at the back of the house. "Are you sure?" I said. "I don't hear anything dripping. Should I go outside and look?" "It's not outside," Ramon answered. "It's inside somewhere. There must be a leak." I cocked my head and listened intently, but there was nothing. "I don't hear a thing," I said. "I hope it's not the ghost or whatever was making all those odd noises before my cousins got here." He concentrated for 30 seconds and said nothing. Then he inched through the hallway to the stairs at the front of the house. "It stopped already," he grumbled. "I'm going to go see what it was." I fell back onto my pillow and pulled Rocky and Bess closer to me. Fritz, on the other hand, jumped from the foot of the bed and followed Ramon. I pulled the covers up under my chin and I listened as they made their way downstairs. I could visualize Ramon checking the kitchen and walking through the coat room and then examining the sink in the little bathroom under the front stairs. Then I could see him opening the door and checking the cellar before mounting the servant stairs to see if anything was wrong in the bathroom on the second floor. Afterward, I could hear him trudge up to the third floor bathroom, where I speculated he found nothing as well. Back in the hallway outside the bedroom, he scratched his head and rethought his strategy. "I know I heard something coming from somewhere. It sounded like it was down in the foyer, but I didn't see anything down there," he said. I sat up. "It was probably outside." I punched the pillow to fluff it up. "No, it was inside, and it was dripping water." He walked down the long hallway and started a thorough search of the other bedrooms on the second floor. Realizing that I wasn't going to get any sleep until Ramon discovered the source of the noise, I dragged myself out of bed and joined him on the front stairs as he descended to the foyer. I flipped on the light, which caused the slick floors to sparkle and shine, and we searched the parlor and the dining room. There was no sign of water anywhere. Ramon scratched his head again and did a complete 360 of the room, convinced that he had to be missing something. "I know it came from here somewhere." He started moving from the corner to another corner in search of the culprit sound, careful not to slip on the newly waxed floorboards. Then, as he approached the area between the base of the stair and the small bathroom underneath the landing, a glint of light on the smooth floor caught our attention. At first, it appeared to be a reflection from the gleaming patch of hardwood, but from a new angle, we could see the light from the stairs now completely illuminated the shimmering surface of a large puddle that had previously gone unnoticed. Stretching out from the bottom step to the grandmother clock, the source of the disturbance measured at least 4 feet in diameter. "What the?" In his stocking feet, Ramon almost slipped on the polished wood as he tentatively approached the pool. Catching himself on the balustrade, he got down on his hands and knees to inspect the puddle. I carefully made my way to the other side and looked up to see where the water could have come from. Everything seemed dry overhead. I got down on all fours as well, and we both eyed each other across the glittering surface of the puddle. Maybe a pipe broke somewhere? I looked over my shoulder at the nearest plumbing in the small bathroom under the stairs. Ramon, on the other hand, slowly shook his head. "I don't think it's from a broken pipe." Then he fell silent as a look of disgust swept over his features. He cautiously lowered his face to within an inch of the surface of the puddle and took a long whiff before exploding. "This is pee!" I was about to test the feel of the water, but I jerked my hand back and lifted my head as Ramon shot up the stairs. "What?" I stammered. "It was your cousin, Mark, and I'm going to kill him." I quickly backed away from the puddle in the middle of the beautifully waxed hardwood floor. Gross. Loud footsteps pounded down the hall overhead, and I listened as Ramon threw open the door to the little room at the back of the house. And after what I assumed to be a series of mumbled curse words that started in English and transitioned to Spanish, I heard his first identifiable words. "What did you do?" He was yelling at my cousin, who was evidently fast asleep. "Wake up and come downstairs." "He's just like Pat," I half-heartedly called out into the ether. Shaking my head, I began to trudge up the stairs. "Good luck trying to wake him. It's easier trying to wake up a cadaver with a cup of coffee." From the end of the hall, I heard some random jostling and a smattering of swear words as Ramon tried to rouse my cousin. After a few seconds, I heard a groan that emanated from Mark. "What?" said a slurred voice heavy with sleep or whatever. "What did you just do?" said Ramon. "I don't know," said Mark. "Went to the bathroom." I emerged at the top of the stairs and walked back to the bedroom Mark and Pat shared. Ramon stood over Mark, who sat on his bed and glumly rubbed sleep from his eyes. "Oh, yeah?" said Ramon. "So, you went to the bathroom. Where'd you go?" "I don't know. The bathroom down the hall?" Mark closed his eyes and fell back onto the pillow. Ramon shook Mark until he sleepily opened an eye. "What? Where am I?" he said, casting a suspicious glance around the room. "Good grief, here we go with the not knowing where we are again." I shook my head. Ramon reached down and pulled Mark out of bed. "You want to pee on the landing, and now it's all down on the hardwood floors I spent a day polishing. Get downstairs and clean it up." A soft clack, clack, clack echoed behind me as Fritz trotted down the hall and nosed his way around my legs and walked into the bedroom. He sat on his haunches and studied the sight before him. My cousin closed his eyes again and tried to slump down on his bed, which caused Fritz to bark once. "Don't even think about going back to sleep," said Ramon, dragging Mark to his feet. I picked up Fritz and stood aside as Ramon shuffled down the hall. Mark was in front, aided by the hand grasping his collar in the back. They stumbled along the hallway and down to the front stairs. In the foyer, Ramon pointed to the door leading down into the basement. "The shop vac's down there," he said. "Get moving." Fritz was getting antsy, so I put him down and got his leash on. I opened the front door and took him out into the yard. During all the commotion, Rocky and Bess had come down to the landing and watched from a safe distance, but when I tried to get them to join us in the front yard, they only stared at me like I was crazy. Simultaneously, they turned around and padded back up the stairs, no doubt to the comfort of my bed. Outside, the air was damp, and the moon appeared to be almost full. Only a few thin strips of cloud stood out against the purplish sky. Inhaling a lungful of cool air, I stood on the front steps and watched as Fritz moseyed over to an ivy patch and started to root around. That's when I noticed a shadowy form standing on the sidewalk out front. At first, I assumed it was a person walking past the house, but then I saw that the figure was stationary. Whoever it was only stood there, apparently staring up at the house. I was considering whether or not it would be a good idea to speak to the person, but before I could make up my mind, the form turned and started walking down the sidewalk toward Oak Street. From the silhouette and gait, it appeared to be a slender man. From the safety of the steps, I watched him disappear down the sidewalk and then tugged on Fritz's leash. We went inside, and I quickly closed the door behind me. Ramon and Mark had emerged from the cellar stairs, and Ramon stood watch as Mark glumly pulled the shop vac into the foyer. Fritz and I looked on as Mark plugged in the machine and started to vacuum up the puddle. But it was slow going. After several minutes, I took Fritz, and we went back upstairs to join Rocky and Bess. Several days later, Pat and Mark moved out. Okay, so that's that chapter. So my phone is dying. Hang on one second while I get a cord to recharge this. And then, I don't know if we're going to be able to read much more anyway, but just give me a couple seconds. I'll tell you a couple things, all right? Okay. Well, I think we're okay. Yeah, so Pat and Mark were actually my brothers, Mike and Paul. I changed the names when I wrote the book because I had readers look over it, and one of my friends, she's a great writer. Her name's Mary Poppin. She she didn't like the way they were portrayed, so I changed their names. She thought I was being kind of mean to them. And the funny thing is, with Paul and Mike, I toned down a lot of what they did and said. So, all that happened, and yeah, they kind of wore out their welcome. But people from the dinner parties we used to have, they remember Paul and Mike living there. They did great work, but like I said, they after a time they just kind of you know they got wanderlust and wanted to go on other places. But the scene with Ramon making Mike shop vac up the urine, that was really toned down because Ramon was furious. Mike had long, well, he still has long hair. My brother Mike kind of looks like Jesus. When they were staying at the house, he was floating in the back pool one day on a tube, and a friend of mine came over, and he didn't know my brother was staying with us. He said, Jesus is in your back pool floating on an inner tube. And I said, that's my brother Mike. But Ramon, Mike was so out of it that night. Ramon grabbed him by his hair and dragged him down the stairs like a caveman. So, and the funny thing is, all that stuff about Ramon saying, I'm going to kill your brothers. I'm going to kill your brothers. He was saying that every day. So he had more patience with my brothers than I did, actually. I was ready to kill them too. But, yep. So, Rebecca, you want to hear about the nighttime visitors? Yeah. So Rebecca Stackhouse, she's got a favorite chapter, and it's the next chapter. So if anyone wants to hang around, I'll read this next chapter, which is about 5 pages. So it's about 15 minutes. So we'd be going over tonight about an hour and 15 minutes instead of an hour. So if you want to hang around, I'm going to read the next chapter in honor of Rebecca, and it's called Nighttime Visitors. So once again, if you get a chance, let people know where you're from, say hi, what you're drinking. And I mentioned this last night. If you can, check in at La Casa Fabulosa on Facebook. There's an actual check-in place, so check in. Don't forget to check us out on Louisville Historic Tours, our newly revamped website, which is being worked on by Sean Stafford, my friend, doing a lot of great things. Give us some stars on TripAdvisor. Go to Amazon.com. We're still working on lots of merchandise, so keep an eye out. Yes, Bob, they were at Meg Bar all the time. They were at all the neighborhood bars all the time. Yeah. All right, so we're going to do another chapter. Since it's Saturday night, we'll go out with a bang. We're going to read Nighttime Visitors, and then we'll call it a night, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. Okay? So, this chapter is called Nighttime Visitors. Not too long after my cousins left, I was pleased to discover that a company was still making Sugar Babies candy, a childhood favorite of mine I thought had gone out of existence. When I spied them one day at the drugstore, I snatched up several bags and brought them home. I put the little caramel bits in a nice silver bowl in the kitchen, smiling to myself whenever I saw them over the next several days. One morning, however, I was alarmed to discover that someone had been sneaking them out of their little silver dish, which I kept on the counter in the kitchen. Not only that, they were being messy about it and leaving Sugar Babies scattered all around the bowl. I asked Ramon if he had been eating them, but he swore he hadn't, adding that he didn't even like them. Although I was puzzled by the theft of my Sugar Babies, not to mention scandalized by the fact that Ramon did not love them as much as I did, I soon forgot about it and began keeping the little silver dish in one of the cupboards at night. About the same time, we started to hear faint scratching noises in the kitchen walls and the ceiling in the butler's pantry. But with all the odd things that had been going on in the house, I was willing to chalk the strange sounds up to more unexplained phenomena, until a week later, when I went down to the kitchen for my morning coffee. The night before, I had forgotten to put the bowl of sugar babies away in the cupboard. It was still early, before sunrise, when I got out of bed. Although there was plenty of light to see by, the interior of the house had been cast in a milky gray pallor that seemed to make everything glow in a dark and silvery sheen. I entered the kitchen, and my hand reached out for the light switch, but I stopped short of flipping it on, debating whether or not I could make do with the natural light afforded by the two large windows. In my hesitancy, I became aware of a soft noise that reminded me of marbles or small stones being gently moved around on a plate. I let my eyes roam the kitchen, scanning the new tile on the floor and searching out something in the cupboards, and then my gaze shifted to the sink. I saw nothing, but again I heard the soft clink, clink of something small and solid being moved around on a hard surface. That's when I looked over and I saw the rodent, a foot away from me on the kitchen counter. It sat up on its hind legs and was greedily devouring my prized sugar babies, almost like a squirrel going at an acorn. It was no doubt enjoying its sugar fix so much that it hadn't heard me sneak up on it, and I was horrified to no end, especially when I saw its fat belly paunching out over the edge of the little silver candy dish. "Leave my sugar babies alone!" I yelled, turning on the lights. Then I yanked open the nearest drawer and extracted a large wooden spoon. Only mildly startled, the rat looked up and dropped the half-gnawed sugar baby. Seeing me waving the wooden spoon, it dropped down on all fours and rattly scampered away to the relative safety of my KitchenAid stand mixer. After several seconds, it darted out from behind the stainless steel bowl, and as it weaseled its way along the groove where the counter and the backsplash came together, I fiercely slapped at its tail with the wooden spoon, and of course I missed every time. Slap, 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 slap. I followed as it took cover behind the flour and sugar canisters. Slap, 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 slap. I changed it around the sink and pounded at it until it reached the stove and dove behind it. When I pulled the stove away from the wall, I discovered a large hole had been chewed through the plaster, right above the baseboard. I pushed the appliance back into its spot and started hatching a plan. I had to protect my sugar babies. Later that day, I found Ramon upstairs. "We got rats," I told him. "Or maybe they're just big mice. What should we do?" "Buy some poison." He was watching TV with the dogs and didn't appear to be too concerned. "Oh, that's so inhumane," I said. "I feel like a murderer. Maybe I can find some of those humane traps where you catch them and let them go." He rolled his eyes and said nothing. There was a pot of burgoo simmering on the stove, so I turned down the heat, put on my shoes, and told him I was going to run around the corner to Lee's Hardware. "Put on a different shirt," he called out after me. "You look like a hobo." Well, if I looked like a hobo, the cashier behind the counter didn't say anything about it. When the woman heard my predicament, she cheerily walked me to an aisle that catered to the likes of exterminators and other people charged with the riddance of vermin. Poised and smiling like a game show model, she stretched out an arm and showed me a lovely assortment of traps and poisons. "There you go. One of these will do the trick." I looked around for a few seconds and picked up a package of traps. "All I see is poison and traps," I said. "Don't you have the nice traps that just catch them but don't kill them? I don't want to have blood on my hands." She looked at me like I had a screw loose. "So what are you going to do once you finally catch them?" She pursed her lips and crossed her arms. "Well, let them go free outside," I said. She laughed. "And you don't think they'll find their way back inside?" "But I'll plug up all the holes and they won't get back in," I said, cautiously eyeing the box of poison she was shoving in my direction. She laughed so hard she snorted. "And you don't think they don't know how to get back in and chew new holes? They'll be back inside in a week and they'll be bringing their babies and their cousins all along. Here, take the poison and get it over with." She shuffled back to the counter and resumed her seat on the stool. "Rats are nasty. They deserve poison." I turned the box of poison over and studied the instructions, but then returned it to its spot on the shelf. Shamed, I bought some paintbrushes and left. On the way home, I had a brilliant idea. I thought, I didn't have to let them loose right outside my house. I could drive them somewhere far, far away and let them free there. But it had to be somewhere far enough away that their mousy radar wouldn't guide them back to old Louisville. I knew the perfect place, the East End. I could drive them all to Lake Forest or any one of the well-heeled subdivisions out that way and set them free amidst the cookie-cutter splendor of suburban America and its manicured lawns and tidy hedges. The East End needed more vermin, and I was ready to help. Several days later, and after numerous unsuccessful trips to the exterminator sections of local stores, I located a set of humane mousetraps online and ordered them. Within days, they arrived, and I was ready to make my first express delivery of rodentia to the East End. I placed 2 traps, each baited with the sugar baby, behind the stove, and the other 2 I placed on either side of the silver candy dish on the counter where the initial transgression had taken place. I waited throughout the day, and nothing happened. When I went up to bed, I was sure I'd awake to find full traps the next morning. But every single trap was empty. And most of them looked as if they'd been moved around a bit. One of them was next to the silver bowl, and it had been tipped over on its side. And the worst part was that the number of sugar babies in the bowl had looked significantly diminished. Undeterred, I filled the silver bowl and returned it to the refrigerator where I'd been storing it while I worked out my strategy. That night, before I went up to bed, I put the bowl back on the counter and repositioned the trap. When I came down the next morning, the same sight awaited me. Considerably fewer sugar babies and traps that had been moved around. I also discovered a hole chewed through a cereal box in one of the cupboards and a half-eaten potato dragged across the floor and abandoned in plain view. They were taunting me. Time for Plan B. I got into the car and drove to the store. I had heard about sonic repellents that you plug into an outlet and poof, no more rodents, so that would be the next course of action. The only problem was how to round them up outside and capture them so I could still deposit them in the front yard of some East End McMansion. Maybe I could look around outside and locate the grand poobah of mouse holes that had allowed them access to the interior of my house in the first place, and then set up a deathless trap nearby. It was worth a trap. It was worth a try. 2 hours later, I was back at my home, 3 of the electronic devices in a plastic bag swinging at my side. I read all the instructions and warnings after extracting them from the packaging, and I plugged them in. One went in the outlet above the baseboard right next to the stove. I plugged a second one into the socket above the counter, inches away from the spot where the silver bowl with the sugar babies rested when it wasn't stashed away in the refrigerator. The third ended up sticking out of the wall under the little table in the butler's pantry. I went up to bed that night relatively confident that my rodent problem had been solved. So confident, in fact, that I neglected to put the silver bowl and the sugar babies in the refrigerator before retiring. When I dragged myself downstairs the next morning and entered the kitchen, I was painfully made aware that these electronic repellents were a load of bunk. Almost all of the sugar babies were missing from my silver bowl, which had been upended in the sink, and several half-chewed specimens had been scattered across the surface of the counter. 2 potatoes had been dragged out of the basket on the floor by the refrigerator and lay uneaten in the middle of the doorway. Above the microwave, one of the cupboard doors was ajar. Inside, I found a tipped-over box of rolled oats with a hole chewed through its bottom and the contents spilling out. 2 plastic-wrapped packages of microwave popcorn had been thoroughly decimated, one of them a crinkled up, twisted mess that had gotten stuck in the hole at the back of the cabinet where the rodents had attempted to carry it away. Had they gotten together for a party or what? Okay, time for Plan C, I told myself. Now, I wasn't so concerned about the creatures dying, but it had to be a humane demise. No sticky traps where they languished in mousy purgatory for days before the Grim Reaper came to carry them back whence they came. No, they needed to die right away. Only slightly annoyed that the East End would not enjoy the fruits of my labor, I made for the front door and soon found myself back at Lee's Hardware store on Oak Street. You want a plain old trap this time, or you want poison? The woman behind the counter fairly beamed at me. I say go with the poison. That'll get 'em good. Let's try the traps and see how that goes, I said reluctantly. Traps are the tried and true raid, aren't they? I headed for the vermin aisle and grabbed 4 traps. Yeah, she nodded her head. Nothing like a good old-fashioned snap trap to do the trick. Get the little bastards good. She rang me up and I headed through the door into the pleasant weather outside. I walked to the store to get more sugar babies and then went back to Woodmore House. Before I reached the kitchen, the traps had been unpacked and I had to teach that afternoon, so I quickly baited each trap with a plump sugar baby before setting it in what was considered a most enticing location. Then I left. I returned late that afternoon and walked through the back door, anxious to see the devastation wrought by the traps. But not a single mousely corpse did I find. Instead, I noticed that all the traps had been sprung and all of the sugar babies had been spirited away. I felt my ire rising. How did they do that? I reset the traps and let the dogs outside. Then I took up a spot on the couch while we watched TV, all the while keeping an eye out for the kitchen. From where I was sitting, I could see the corner of the counter where the silver bowl usually sat, and I was sure to spy any rodent that had the temerity to venture forth. 1 hour passed, and then another as darkness fell, but nothing happened in the kitchen. I was suddenly bored with the television, so I decided to run up to the third floor and do some work in my office. Just then, a loud snap echoed in the kitchen. Wringing my hands in anticipation, I tiptoed into the kitchen, praying that I would find a dead rodent in one of the traps. The two devices on the counter hadn't been touched, so I moved over to the stove and peered over the side to the floor. Sure enough, there on the blue tile and the green tile lay a limp critter in the deadly grip of the trap. I clapped my hands together, only slightly remorseful to have the death of a rodent on my conscience. At least I would finally be rid of the things, I told myself, and more important, my sugar babies would now be safe. I studied the flaccid gray piece of fur while I studied and decided what to do with the carcass. Should I remove it from the trap for recycling purposes, or should I throw the entire thing away, rodent and all? I decided on the latter and pulled a pair of barbecue tongs out of a nearby drawer. Carefully, slowly, I aimed for the rodent corpse and grabbed the trap with the cold metal pincers. Holding out at arm's length in front of me, I opened the back door with the other hand and prepared to walk through the backyard to the trash cans in the alley. It was a balmy and warm night, and several stars twinkled overhead as I made my way around the swimming pool. Suddenly, the tongs started violently bouncing up and down as the rodent kicked its back legs and came to life. Wee, wee, wee! It made the most blood-curdling, pathetic squeals as it thrashed to and fro in an attempt to free itself from the trap. Wee, wee, wee! The neighbors must have been able to hear it a block away. As the thrashing and squealing continued, I looked up, and at the back door I saw Rocky and Bess and Fritz, who had come to see what all the commotion was about. On the other side of the screen door, they stood with their heads cocked. Pangs of guilt stabbed at my soul as I realized what I had done, and I rushed to the large city garbage can in the back alley to get rid of the evidence. I lifted the dark plastic lid, tossed the trapped creature inside, closed the lid, and then scampered back to the house. However, when I reached the back door, I could still hear the muffled squeals coming from the garbage can. As the thing continued its pitiable shrieking, I knew I couldn't just toss it away and let it suffer. I'd have to put it out of its misery, so I turned around and went back to the trash container. My stomach in nauseous pit, I considered my options. Stomp on it? No, it would probably manage to bite me and give me rabies. Squash it with a big stone? No, that would be too messy. Hurl it against the wooden fence? No, too unreliable. The thing might not die. Little by little, the squealing was starting to subside as the rodent was overcome with exhaustion. But all of a sudden, the big overground pool in the backyard came into focus. Yes, I thought to myself, I would drown it. Quickly, I drew back the lid and I leaned over into the half-full container of garbage. But when the creature saw me, it started squealing again and tried burrowing into a mound of rotting vegetable peels. Only after it seemed that I pushed half of my body into the container did I manage to seize the trapped creature with the tongs and extract it from the trash heap. Running back through the gate, I tossed the struggling rodent over the edge of the pool and watched it hit the water with a splash. It floundered a bit, momentarily buoyed by the little wooden raft clamped to his neck, and then it plummeted to the vinyl blue depths below. Relieved, I sat down on the deck and reassured myself that death would soon be coming. The dogs were still at the back door looking at me and seemingly awaiting an explanation. I told myself to ignore the drowning creature in the depths, but after a moment's reflection, I gave in to the urge and peered over the side of the pool. There, at the shimmering bottom, I could see the little guy with the trap still around his shoulders, pushing himself toward the nearest plastic wall in an attempt to exit his watery grave. What have you done, you monster? I thought to myself, the guilt too much to bear. I grabbed the tongs and heaved myself over the edge of the pool, plunging my upper torso headfirst into the cool water while my feet kicked up into the naked air. Underwater, I opened my eyes and spied the creature as he spotted me and turned to scuttle off into the opposite direction. I inchwormed forward with my arms and reached out with the tongs, managing to grab him at the last possible second. With a thrust from the arm that wasn't holding the trap, I heaved myself backwards and exited the water with a gasp, suddenly aware that I had lost both contact lenses during my water acrobatics. Wee! 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 The water had apparently revived the rodent, and he started squealing twice as loudly as he had before. I was starting to get afraid a neighbor might hear and call the police. Wee! Wee! Now the dogs were barking at the back door. Let him go. Release him from the trap, I told myself. Then maybe he would stop making so much noise. Water cascading down my face, I leaned against the side of the pool to steady myself. Then I grabbed the wooden base of the trap, careful not to get my fingers near his mouth or claws, and somehow I managed to raise the wire snap a tiny bit, and the rodent was able to dislodge its body from the trap, and it fell. But instead of falling to the ground below, it hit the edge of the pool and bounced back into the water. Good grief, was this really happening? I watched